Thank you so much for taking us through the history of how Bhutanese journalism came to be about and how it has changed over the years. And I definitely agree that over the years, it has definitely gathered more power and has leveraged that power to really turn it into proactive actions out there. And I think in this conversation now, I'm so curious to dive into the ethical side, because both of you did mention some of the challenges, right? Because with great responsibility comes great, I think, power. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility too. So I want to know from your experience a bit more about the ethical dilemmas that you've faced and how were you able to navigate those. And I feel like this could be helpful for young aspiring journalists to take notes of.
Yes, Ragita, obviously as a journalist, because you said because of the power that the media sometimes has, that, that the responsibility is immense. And every day you're faced by some kind of challenge that you're navigating. Right? And one of the things that, with what the media is happening is that it is, especially in many Asian countries, very difficult to work in a hostile environment. Because quite often authorities and governments don't like what you are saying, and they try to kind of, browbeat you. In a lot of the South Asian countries, you have intimidation, harassment, arrest. Journalists are arrested, or they're just kind of intimidated in a way that they are not able to say what they want. And this climate of fear, which has been created in certain areas, causes a degree of self-censorship. So I think that is one of the big challenges that we are facing, that, no one's telling them that, don't do it, but they're so scared that they don't do it, right? I think that is one huge problem that we are facing. So I think that's where we need what Kinley said, courage. To be a journalist, you have to have courage to stand up for your principles and values, because you are in the service, of the people, the citizens, and also then in the service of a system, a democratic system, a system which wants to ensure good governance. So it is our vocation to do that. So I think that's a big ethical dilemma. Should you speak up or should you not? And I think in justice, you definitely have to speak up. Otherwise, just leave the profession. Then you're not just doing your job, right? So you should just get out of it and do some PR work or something for some company and earn big money. But, don't play around with journalism, right? A second ethical dilemma that I face, and personal issues, that, there's a great deal of focus led by some channels on getting TRPs, the television rating points, right? So sensationalism has become a very big a part of television. Certainly in India, where I'm living at the moment, you look at the TV in the evening, everybody's shrieking, nobody's talking, and it's a drama that you unfold every day, and it really affects my sense of happiness, and certainly wouldn't work in Bhutan's gross national happiness. Every time I see what's happening on TV there, my happiness comes down, right? So I think it is again an ethical decision you take as a journalist. Do I want to be a part of that ecosystem, or do I want to focus on real issues and people, right? So that is an ethical dilemma that you're faced every day. And I'm, of course, of the variety that you have to actually focus on the issues and the people. And a third thing is, a personal thing that I found is that quite often when you're on the field, you see very distressing images. And people in very vulnerable and unhappy situations. Do you show those pictures? I work for television, and I am not in favor of showing those pictures. I talk to you about the power of visuals, but I think you owe it to somebody who's in a difficult situation to protect them and protect their dignity. But I think in the media at the moment, voyeurism, showing everything is terrible. And I think it's also, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I feel very strongly. I've got into trouble with some editors a couple of times. Oh, they want to show the picture. I said, no, not if I'm moderating the show. I'm not showing this picture, right? I can talk about it, but I'm not showing the picture. So I think every day we are faced with decisions, and we need to be kind of, decide for ourselves, what kind of a journalist you want to be. And that is really key. And also, when, being in Bhutan, I learned something which I haven't heard in the context of journalism for a long time, and that was the word trust. I moderated a panel on freedom of speech, and Kinley was a part of it. And, and an honorable minister from Bhutan talked about trust. A person in the audience who was from a civil society of Bhutan talked about trust. And I think that's important. So that is an ethical dilemma. Will people trust me, if I do my work? And for me, that comes, with the territory. You have to create that trust.
Secondly, how about you?
I will talk about self-censorship, I think, which is quite high, I think, the level of self-censorship in our newsrooms, Bhutanese newsrooms, is quite high, quite prevalent. This is also, because of where we come from. This also, again, we need to understand this within our political and cultural context. We are a very small, tight-knit society. Everyone knows everyone. And there are pressures, social pressures, mostly from family, friends. And if you do a very critical story, and they're like, "What are you doing?" There will be repercussions. Like, see, this kind of pressures are there. And it's not direct political interference. You're not going to get a call from the authority up there and saying like, why did you do that story? No, it doesn't come like that. So a lot of these pressures are very subtle from family, friends, and cautioning you, not to do a controversial story. So self-censorship, is quite high, because of that in Bhutan, because we are small, and also I think a certain values like we respect okay, for example certain institutions, so we don't necessarily write stories about negative stories about them. So most of the time there is nothing negative to write about, also. But so this self-restraint is there in the media, in Bhutanese media, which leads to a high prevalence of self censorship, and again, this is an ethical decision, that you make every day, in our newsrooms. Should we do this? Should we not do this? Why should we do this? And why should we not do this? I think it's a constant debate, we have, especially I think reporters and editors, and they're often, like this fights, happening between editors and reporters, and this is something exciting about newsrooms, that we discuss about ethical, issues, on daily basis. Recently, like I had just joined, as an example, I just joined Kunsil, and then there was a news about an elected representative, who was allegedly accused of, molesting a child, and that elected representative, happened to be my close friend, childhood friend, in fact. And I was like, oh my God, is this a test? I just joined, Kunsil a week back, and then this happens, So as I told her, I told everyone, thing like in the newsroom, it's like I have a personal, relationship with this person. I've just joined Kunsil, I declare my conflict of interest, You guys do whatever you guys have to do, I'm out of this, So I declared my conflict of interest, And so the newsroom, the editor and all, they decided to run this. In fact, they ran a couple of stories, follow-ups also, So see, this is an ethical, this was really, an ethical, dilemma for me, to should I do this, should I not do this? And then at the end, I felt, I should not be involved, in this because, I have a conflict of interest. So I declared my conflict of interest, and the newsroom, went ahead with the story. Just an example, yeah.
I'm actually so carried away by this conversation that I'm like forgetting my speaking point, but that's because all that you've shared is so enriching and so new to me, but at the same time I'm learning so much. So thank you for that. Now I think going forward, because you two have so much of experience and yet you're still part of media and journalism, so I'm sure you have a vision of how you want journalism to be going forward, but at the same time the reality of where it is heading. So maybe we can end this podcast by talking about the future of journalism that you think it's going to be, and versus how you'd want it to be as well. If there's any parallels, or do you think it's heading in the right direction, the future of journalism?
Oh, that's a big question, Ragita. Yeah. Some of the issues we've already talked about, that the changes that are coming, technological changes which are coming about with journalism, is putting a lot of pressure on journalists and journalism. For example, just the kind of disinformation that we are getting, the fake news that we are getting, and I think that's a scourge of journalism, because quite often, half the time, as a journalist, you're just trying to sort out, is this true or is it not true? Is this fake news or is it not fake news? So I think that is a huge challenge. And but I feel that, on the whole, the technology, we must use the technology to empower ourselves. And there are challenges as to how it's being used, especially with AI, artificial intelligence, which has made things also more challenging. But I think I am on the whole optimistic, because with every time when there's a new technology and a new direction, we as individuals and collectively as society find ways to cope with these challenges and find and navigate through this thing in a way that is for the greater good of the country or the nation or society or the community. So I am hopeful in that sense. But I think one of the things is that I think, because people, as I said, for me, are always at the heart of the story, but people for me are also at the heart of the profession. So, I would call for people who come in for journalism, not, when I first joined journalism, I would say, I want to be on TV, right? I had no intention of being on the TV. That was a byproduct, right? I wanted to tell stories, yeah? So I think that people who want to go into journalism should have a certain affinity. They must question themselves why they want to go. And if they just want to be on television, then maybe they want to go into kind of, entertainment or something. But journalism is a serious business, so I think you have to choose your profession carefully. I think, and if you have the right people in the right profession, that benefits the profession. And I think all the technology that we are getting, whether it's AI, whether it's social media, and all the various platforms that we have. And I'm not dismissive of the new platforms like Instagram and TikTok, and, because people say, oh, they're just kind of, fluffy stuff and entertainment and, pretty girls or pretty boys. I don't agree with that. And I think that is a very important tool to reach younger people, but just change the content or increase the content. Also use news there. And studies show that there is a lot of serious content being posted on these platforms. I think we need to build on that. And also I think that it is quite important that we focus also on constructive journalism. Deutsche Welle, where I worked, that was a very important part of our agenda, that more and more we are getting research that shows that people are getting depressed with news. They're turning away from news. It's called news avoidance. That people are just switching off the TV. They don't want to read newspapers, So if you're facing a challenge like that, which threatens the media industry, we have to find a way to give people what they're looking for. And they're looking for news, but they're also looking for constructive ideas. So I think, maybe we can use all the tools we have at our disposal to also bring that into the mix of journalism that we have.
Yes, I think as a young person, there's definitely an overload of information with all the technological apps that there is, right? And like you mentioned, misinformation, disinformation. It's so difficult to see if the news that I'm receiving, if it's real, if it's factual, if it is biased. So, and you also mentioned about how you have to incorporate that. But then I think as a young person, I am curious, because I think the generation that we have right now are not so media literate, despite having media at our disposal. How do you think we can do that? How do you think we can change the system or build a more media literate generation so that we don't fall victims to such, I think, a fallacious movement that is happening in terms of, I think, not so credible journalism?
You see, I think that people are consuming media differently. So I'm not of the belief that people who are young are necessarily silly, right? And that they don't understand what's happening. I think their interests are different, right? So I think I have huge regard and respect for the intelligence of young people. But I think we have to give them stories which they can consume, and in a language and in a format that they understand and can relate to. Right? You give them long opinion pieces and all, that's not their way of consuming news, right? So I think, firstly, we have to respect our audience, the young audience, and the formats that they need and they want, right? Not to be dismissive of that. And then within that, I think I am also a great believer in media information and media literacy. And which, I know in Bhutan, there's a lot of focus on that through the various organizations, the Bhutan, Media Foundation, and also the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung. And I think a lot of people are now putting a focus, I think at a school level, perhaps. I think it should be, especially because you're getting the young people. At the school level, I think media literacy should be a compulsory subject that everyone has to study. And then obviously, seminars, and it should be at college level, workshops. I think it should be something which is fairly compulsory. But, as to how we can help everybody, and it's also not just, I think, young people. It's also people living in rural areas quite often. And I'm also a great believer that, you know, people. When I've lived in Germany for a long time, right, longer than I've lived in India, and people always say, yeah, you know, Indians, they're not very literate, so they, you know, how do elections work there? You know, they get manipulated. Nonsense, I tell them. You know, these people may be illiterate, but they have a very good sense of where their interest lies, right? You journalists can go and tell them whatever you want. They have a very good sense of it. So again, we need to just respect our audiences, right? But also, given that this technology is playing such devious games, especially artificial intelligence, we just have to make them aware that this is happening. Yeah, so they can so they can deal with it. So I think media literacy should be a part of school curriculum and part of national policy.
Yes, so Mr. Kinley, Dr. Amrita just shared her aspirations for the future of journalism and how we can navigate it mindfully. I would like to ask you the same question. Like in Bhutan, especially, we see this growing trend of social media being consumed so daily and having so many people coming online, spreading so many kinds of information in so many different ways. Some can be seen as unethical as well. So how do you think the future of journalism can be navigated in a better way in Bhutan, and how can we influence this to a bigger chunk of the population in terms of media literacy as well?
I think we cannot help social media. I think, you know, social media has come and it has had, you know, such a huge impact on the lives of people. I think there are a lot of positives also. You know, it has such a huge network. I think, you know, network citizen. I think Dr. Ranga, I think, was talking about it that time, you know, during the panel discussion. You know, like and with that, I think, you know, communication has become so much easier. You know? On the go, you know, and information can be spread, you know, disseminated. I think, you know, so fast, you know, and then especially when information goes viral again, you know, like, you know, reaching millions of people, you know, at the same time again, you know. So there are a lot of positives of social media. Of course, then, you know, there are the negative, you know, like, you know, two sides of the coin. I think, you know, the negative side being, you know, what you're talking about, you know, a lot of fake news. I think disinformation, you know, misinformation, you know, and then, you know, we have, you know, people, you know, influencers, you know, emerging, you know, social media celebrities, you know, who a lot of them are also doing good things, but also I think need to be conscious of, you know, their work, the impact, you know, they're creating, especially, you know, serious stuff, you know, like sharing information, you know, or talking about issues, you know, because there is no editorial process, you know, here for journalism, for newspaper, you know. There is many layers of, you know, fact checking. You know, there's this entire editorial process, you know, of verifying, you know, information that it goes through, you know, the editorial process. The editor, you know, does, and then only, you know, it is published. You know? So there is this process that is followed. You know, fact checking process is there, verification of information, you know, is happening. You know, whereas, you know, in the social media that's not happening. You know. And quite often, I think, you know, the role of, you know, the mainstream media, you know, at times, you know, is also that, you know, of a vetting machine. We have become a vetting machine. Is this right? Is it wrong? Fact checking here, you know, saying this is a scam, this is fake news, you know. In many ways, I think that is a role that we are playing also now, you know, an emerging role of the mainstream media, you know, in the age of social media, you know, unrestrained social media. So I don't know, you know, like I think the answer to this, the solution to this is definitely going to be, you know, media literacy is the only, you know, I think answer, you know, like, and as Dr. Cheema was pointing out, you know, like I think we need to catch our children young, you know, getting them young, you know, like I think this should be, you know, media literacy has to be, I think, you know, part of the mainstream, you know, education curriculum in beginning, I think, you know, because now our children, you know, as young as, you know, 3 years old, I think they have access to, you know, devices. That means they have access to, you know, social media, and they're on TikTok, you know. My daughter is 10 years old and she's already on TikTok, you know, she's got more followers than me. I think she's reaching 1,000 followers now, and she's really excited, you know. And my followers, like, I think I have 150 or 200. to see, but then, personally also at my daughter's level, what I do is I'm constantly, watching her, she cannot reveal her face, but she loves doing animation, and telling stories. So she does that, so her face is never going to be there, So all her characters are animated characters, So I encourage her to be on social media, but then, I say like it comes with certain risks. So even, parents, educators, teachers, I think, whole of society, I think, government again, has a huge role in terms of regulations, in terms of advocacy, institutions, I think, all of, I think, we will have to come together, and manage this problem.
With that, we come to an end of today's podcast, Beyond the Headlines, Media Revolutionaries, brought to you by Frederick Newman Foundation. And we were joined by two media revolutionaries themselves, Dr. Amrita and Mr. Kinley. So thank you for coming to the show. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to us.